everybody. It's Margie Meacham. Welcome back for another issue of the Learning to Go podcast. And this time around, I'm really thrilled to have back my very first guest, which is Mr. Bruce Tulgan. He's the founder of Rainmaker Thinking, which is a research and training organization. He's the author of Bridging the Skills Gap, the Soft Skills Gap, which is actually why I asked him here today. And he also has written many, many other books, including the 27 challenges that managers face. So, Bruce, I want to welcome you back. And I want to ask you, first of all, when did you first start noticing that there's a soft skills gap? Because I think that's a very important distinction.
Yeah, well, we've been doing research on the front lines of the workplace for 23 years now. So we've been tracking these issues since 1993. And by the way, thank you so much for having me back on your show. It's an honor to be back, and I'm especially glad to be back to talk about this issue because it's an issue that hides in plain sight in so many workplaces. Most people hear about the technical skills gap. There's a greater demand than there is supply of some critical technical skills in the workplace. But there's also an ever-widening soft skills gap in the workforce, especially among the new young workforce. And it's been growing since we've been doing this research, so 23 years. But in the last 5 or 10 years, it's become much more pronounced.
Yeah, and when you say it's become more pronounced, can you give me a couple of examples?
Yeah, well, look, when I use the term soft skills, this is in contrast to hard skills or technical skills. So soft skills encompass a wide range of non-technical skills like self-awareness, people skills, basic work habits, attitude, teamwork, critical thinking. Those are the kinds of skills that are soft skills. And just because they're soft doesn't mean they're easy. They may be less tangible. They may be a little harder to define and measure than hard skills, but they're absolutely critical. And in many ways, these are the old-fashioned basics, and they are in greater and greater demand as they have been in less supply. So we measure this by talking to hiring managers in workplaces of all shapes and sizes. And over the last decade, the incidence has been growing of hiring managers telling us that this is a real gap that's growing, that when employees walk in the door, a lot of times they have the technical skills, but they don't have the soft skills. And, there's an old cliche, people get hired because of their hard skills, but they get fired because of their lack of soft skills.
Yeah, or maybe we could say they get promoted because of their soft skills.
Yes, that would be the other end of the spectrum. That's looking on the bright side.
Yeah. Bruce, I have to ask you, it always bothers me when we start talking about generational differences because I think people tend to over-classify. But is this something that is generational that's happening?
Well, look, I think that we're living in an era of nonconformism. There's greater and greater diversity. There's greater and greater awareness that there are lots of different ways to go about lots of different things. And so in some ways, soft skills could be seen, like manners. Think of manners.
Mm-hmm.
In some ways, this could be seen as conformism. Who says that you should look somebody in the eye and shake their hand and say, nice to meet you? And who says you shouldn't greet people by punching them in the nose? This is a matter of conforming to norms of conduct. And so I think we live in an era where norms of conduct are less and less shared, and there's greater and greater differences of opinion about how what's acceptable. And it's also true, though, that our data shows that as much as there's a growing soft skills gap among people of all ages, it is greater among younger, less experienced people, and that's been growing for going on 2 decades. So I think in some ways the second wave millennials, the youngest people coming into the workplace today, are like the ultimate nonconformists in an era of nonconformism. They've been raised, being told all styles are equally valid. And so to the extent that soft skills are a matter of conforming to norms of conduct, they see a lot of these soft skills as matters of style. And, they don't agree necessarily. So, but there is a generational component for sure. I mean, to the extent that you look at people skills and critical thinking and work habits, if you look at the environment in which they're coming of age, there are a lot of factors that play into this, and there is certainly a generational component to it.
So here's probably the question that our audience is asking right now, because most of the folks who listen to this, they're teachers, they're training managers, they're instructional designers. So they're the ones who inherit these new employees who are increasingly weak in this area that traditionally the business hasn't been willing to invest in, that typically don't spend a lot of money training people on soft skills. They expect a certain minimum. Now we have to train to it. Do you have any suggestions for those folks? How do you get people who probably don't buy into the concept in the beginning that these norms are really part of performing well in the workplace? How do you get them to improve in areas that they may perceive as really unnecessary to improve in?
Well, look, organizations have to make a decision. Are soft skills important? Is it important to have employees who follow old-fashioned norms of professionalism, who dress appropriately, who show up on time, who say please and thank you, who know how to have an in-person conversation, who know how to conduct themselves in a team meeting? Is it important to have people in the workplace who know how to take a service mindset and practice good teamwork? And if, as an employer, if you determine that these are important, then you need a strategy. And what some employers try to do is hire their way around this. I think you can't hire your way around the soft skills gap. There's so many sectors of the labor market where it's hard enough to get people with the technical skills. You just can't rule people out because they have apparent weaknesses in their soft skills. So what leading employers are doing is they are building soft skills criteria into their staffing strategy, into their attraction process, into their selection process. But they're also, so they're trying to hire better around these issues, but they're also building it into their onboarding and up-to-speed training, and they're building it into their professional development learning, and they're building it into their even performance management and performance coaching, because these soft skills really matter, especially in certain roles. You have to look at the difference between somebody who has these soft skills and somebody who doesn't can make a huge difference in their outcomes in the workplace.
Yeah, and while you were saying that, I was thinking when you talked about different roles, traditionally everything you've been talking about has been sort of assumed that, say, for example, a business to business salesperson needs these skills. And I would say that's still absolutely true. And 10 years ago, maybe somebody would have said, well, an IT tech doesn't necessarily have to have those skills. And it was just sort of, hey, they're brilliant in IT, take them as they are. But more and more people in those kind of roles are also customer facing. And so in essence, they're the face of the company. And it doesn't do much good to present one image with your sales force and then technical support walks in and it's a whole different experience. So I wonder if it's the need for soft skills is starting to broaden across all job types.
Yeah, well, that's a great point. I mean, imagine the network systems administrator who not only keeps the hardware and software running, but also tracking recurring user issues and finding root causes and implementing systematic solutions, not just maintaining storage, but exploring innovative ideas. Not just a manager in title only, but also a manager who can leverage other people. Or imagine a computer programmer who not only writes great code, but also conducts in-depth interviews with business owners and business users so as to better understand their needs. You have a data analyst who knows how to do the technical side, but a data analyst who has good critical thinking skills and good interpersonal skills can also make much more meaningful predictions about data and make a much more effective presentation of the data. So even if they're not customer facing, these soft skills make a difference even in these technical areas.
Yeah. And I think even more so today and probably increasingly so because we've got we've got such a fluid workplace now. A lot of people work from home. They're sort of their own department of one. And so they may be called upon as that virtual worker to do things that would have previously been done by a more hierarchical organization. So it seems to me the flatter we get, the more important the skills are at every level in the organization.
Well, that's a really good point. But, I like to tell business leaders there's no role that can't be done much more effectively by someone who knows how to conduct him or herself professionally, think critically, and be a good citizen of the organization and a good follower. And these old-fashioned basics matter.
Yeah. And you know what? They matter so much. We have a lot of teachers who listen to this podcast, people who are teaching kindergarten through high school. They're, of course, very focused in the U.S. on meeting benchmarks for technical skills because of the No Child Left Behind and how it really, it's a whole other issue we could talk all day on, but it forces the teacher to focus on graded tests, which may not be the best use of their time or the students. But what would you say to people who are preparing this next generation of workers? What are some of those soft skills that could maybe start being introduced into a school curriculum?
Well, this new focus on grit, perseverance, appreciation and gratitude, all of these skills that are about the character movement, that focus on grit, on character, on resilience. I think this is in the right direction, and I think it's kind of interesting that it's become a movement. And to me, that's a further indication of how much the soft skills gap has become a real issue. It used to be this is just the basics that we teach children at home and at school. We teach people how to conduct themselves and how to interact appropriately, how to be on time, and how to solve problems, and how to be a good citizen. And the fact that this has become a movement in education, I think, is a good indication of how far this has slipped. What we focus on, 12 missing basics, and the first one we emphasize is rigorous self-evaluation. Teaching people the habit of rigorous self-evaluation is the beginning of this. If the mirror is a great teacher, but not if you always like what you see. The idea, right? So the idea that you would be rigorously self-evaluating against an objective standard, that's the beginning of self-improvement. Then personal responsibility, staying focused on what you can control. Those are the two basic building blocks. And then positive attitude. That doesn't mean you have to always feel good on the inside, but that your demeanor and your expressions, your gestures, your words and tone on the outside, that you can maintain a positive, generous, enthusiastic demeanor when you're in a public setting. Good work habits, taking care of yourself, presenting yourself appropriately, being on time, being organized, being diligent, following through. People skills, attentive listening, empathy, the effective use of words, written and verbal, both one-on-one and in groups, both in person and remotely. These are the basic building blocks. We call it professionalism, and that's where we start. Then we move on to critical thinking, which consists of proactive learning and problem-solving skills and decision-making skills. And then we focus on followership. Everyone wants to be a leader. Well, first you have to learn how to be a follower, and that means learning to read context, to see when you're going into a situation for the first time, what is the existing structure, the rules, the customs, so you can figure out where you fit on your way in the door. Citizenship, what does it mean to be a good citizen in this group? Service, approaching relationships in terms of what you have to offer rather than what you want from someone else. Teamwork, meaning playing whatever role you have in relation to the larger mission. Coordinating, cooperating, collaborating with others. These are the kinds of old-fashioned basics that used to be a very important part of preparing someone to function in the workplace. And now schools and families are not doing this as much. There is some counter trend in parenting. There is some counter trend in education where folks are focusing on these things. But for the last 20 or 30 years, this has all been very out of fashion.
Well, yeah, and thank you for kind of running down the list of the soft skills we should be focusing on. If anybody wants to really dig into this, because I certainly think that this discussion with Bruce has raised awareness if you didn't have it already. And for some of us, you're probably just nodding saying, I've been thinking this all along and nobody's been calling it out. So the book is called Bridging the Soft Skills Gap. It's by my guest, Bruce Tulgan. And Bruce, where's the best place for people to find out more about you?
Well, you can always go to our website, rainmakerthinking.com. You can always go to Amazon or, wherever books are sold. But on our website there's a lot of free information, and we post a lot of articles and resources there. So that's where I always point people first.
Okay, absolutely. And everybody, those links are right here in the write-up of the podcast. So you should be able to jump right out there. And Bruce, I have just one more question for you. what are you working on right now that's got you really excited?
Well, we're continuing our research on generational change in the workplace, and we're continuing our research on leadership and management best practices. And so we're doing that research every single day. And as we develop new findings, we do our best to publish them in white papers and articles and books, and bring them to our clients as best we can. So we're working on this research every day. It's 23 years now and ongoing. So we're doing our best every day to gather valuable information.
Okay, and I do my best to share it. And let's make this an annual thing. Let's have you back next year. You can tell us what your latest insights are, because I'm sure things will have changed by then.
Well, I'd be honored to be back on. So anytime you call me, I'm there. Thank you so much for including me.
Thanks, Bruce. I really appreciate it. And with that, everybody, we're going to say goodbye until next time at the next Learning to Go podcast.